On Story is brought to you in part by the Alice Clayburgh Reynolds Foundation, a Texas family providing innovative funding since 1979. On Story, presented by Austin Film Festival, a look inside the creative process from today's leading writers and filmmakers. This week's On Story, Professor Janine Barkis. Sense and Sensibility producer, Lindsay Duran. The Jane Austen Book Club writer, Robin Swycourt. And creator of The Lizzie Bennet Diaries, Bernie Sue.
Pretty much every romantic comedy that we've seen in the last, since the dawn of cinema, I suppose, you can kind of draw a line architecturally, skeletally, plot-wise between that romantic comedy and either Pride and Prejudice or Emma.
In this episode, our panelists discuss how they adapted Jane Austen's beloved novels and why they think her stories remain so powerful today.
I think it's just incredibly amazing that this woman 200 years ago, in the span of like 4 years, published 2 books, 2 stories that have really just kind of been reinvented over and over again. I mean, there's other works, of course, but those 2 are clearly her most famous works, and done over and over again for years and years and years. So there is that, I guess it's relatable is the word I would say. It's kind of hacky to say it, but that's definitely how I see our work, the work that I've done on for YouTube. The comments I get a lot are that the audience can say like, "Oh, I'm a Lizzie," or "I'm an Emma," and so forth, and they kind of see themselves in those heroines.
I was just going to say that I think that she just really gets our species. We don't change as people for the human race, and the jealousies, the loves, the climbing for status, the desire for money and comfort. I mean, these things just continue generation after generation. And when it's set far away, in a time far away, it becomes mythical in a way. That's why we love fairy tales. In this other time, they lived just like us. So we're willing to look at ourselves in this other time wearing different clothing in a way that maybe we aren't quite ready to look at ourselves in contemporary life. So that's my first thought. And the second thought is she has such a great way of using the boundaries, the social boundaries of the time to create conflict and situation for these people so that they have no other way. They must get married in order to survive, or they become like the pathetic spinsters that she constantly portrays.
You talk of feeling idle and useless. Imagine how that is compounded when one has no hope and no choice of any occupation whatsoever.
Our circumstances are therefore precisely the same.
Except that you will inherit your fortune. We cannot even earn ours.
The stakes are super high for the women that are in the books. And she just has a way of restating that problem over and over again in these books. So in a way, it's a sort of it's contemporary because it feels feminist, even though she, in a lot of ways, her values were very conservative, I feel, when you read the books. Certainly, it was very easy to lose her favor by small social missteps. But generally speaking, she has a bead on the situation of what happens when you put people in a box.
I just remember that Robin and I were on a panel a long time ago with Amy Heckerling, talking for the Jane Austen Society. And somebody said, what's the hardest thing about adapting Jane Austen? And Amy said, the whole honor thing. Which I've never forgotten.
You have a great memory, Lindsay. My God, I'm in awe of you.
Well, I've never forgotten that, the whole honor thing. I just thought it was so funny. But it is true. One of the things that you have to deal with are people who keep their word. I mean, in Sense and Sensibility, a horrible person shares a secret with Eleanor just designed to hurt her. And she doesn't, and she says, promise me you'll never tell anybody. So she makes a promise to a terrible person and keeps it. She doesn't tell her sister, she doesn't tell her mother, she gets in terrible trouble and is very hurt because she doesn't share it, but she doesn't share it. So how do you, as a writer, how do you, as a performer, build a world in which that kind of honor matters and you still respect and understand a character who behaves that way? And I think people long for honor. And I think when they see it, if you can get it right on screen and make it understandable, it's a very attractive and these days maybe mysterious thing.
Poor Mr. Ferris, his mother, who by all accounts is very proud, has demanded that he break the engagement on pain of disinheritance. But he has refused to break his promise to Lucy. He has stood by her good man and is cut off without a penny. She has settled it all irrevocably on Mr. Robert, but I cannot stop. I must go to Lucy. Your sister-in-law scolded her like any fury, drove her to hysteria.
How long have you known?
Pigeon, I need the carriage this instant.
Since the night Mrs. Jennings offered to take us to London.
Why did you not tell me?
Lucy told me in the strictest confidence. I could not break my word.
But Edward loves you.
He made me no promises. He tried to tell me about Lucy.
You cannot marry her.
You know, Andrew Davies wrote that adaptation. That scene takes place, and if it had been one long movie, that would have been an Act 3 moment. If he had appeared in a wet shirt in Act 1, it would not have had that impact. But it happened at a moment when Andrew Davies had perfectly set up that they were so close and yet so far. She was going to be traveling in this mythical land where his ancestral home was. There was the chance that she could run into him. They're going to tour that house. She has mixed feelings about it. Kind of think I shouldn't go. What if I run into him? No, he's away. He's away. You're never going to run into him. So the subject is up, whether or not they're going to meet. And you have this beautiful Act 3 collision. At the very moment that you were just most dreading and hoping, which is what Aristotle always talked about as the state you want to be in before catharsis, dreading and hoping that they would run into each other. Here he is, and he emerges, and it's the full sexuality. It's not like The Gentleman. He's a reachable, touchable man in a wet shirt. And you're just like, okay.
Mr. Darcy?
Miss Bennet.
I did not expect to see you, sir. We understood all the family were from home, or we should never have presumed.
I returned a day early.
And that's the power. It came out of writing, and it was beautifully directed and beautifully brought out by his performance and his willingness to don the wet shirt. But I can tell you, it would not have had that power had it been placed anywhere else.
When Emma Thompson was adapting Sense and Sensibility, we felt very free to change the dialogue. I didn't realize what a thorny thing that was at the time, that the BBC had always been very, very slavish And we were making up scenes, and we added a whole first act that isn't in the book. And I felt very free to do that. Maybe because I'm an American, I didn't realize that was not something you could do. And Emma felt very free to do that as well. So there was a moment when we were shooting the ball scene where Marianne sees Willoughby and realizes that he's with somebody else, and she says, "My goodness, Willoughby, will you not shake hands with me?" And we had an expert around for lots of things about how low the bows would be and how low the curtsies would be and how a woman would sit then before there was rock and roll and before the pelvis was freed by rock and roll. It was so wonderful, all this stuff. And she said, we had to choose a year for the movie because, she wrote it initially one way and then it was published over here, and where did we want to set it? And I think we finally said 1800. And the experts said they wouldn't have been shaking hands yet. And Emma said, "It's in the book." It's like one of 3 lines that's actually from the book. Can we please keep it because it's actually in the book.
Willoughby! Good God, Willoughby. Will you not shake hands with me?
How do you do, Miss Marianne?
We felt if you go and look at the book and you look at the adaptation, you see that it's a memory of it rather than the thing itself. And I thought that was the amazing thing about Emma as a screenwriter, was that she could capture the voice of that time and the voice of that language without being slavish to the actual words, so you don't feel betrayed. And it was so interesting to us that people would say to Emma, my favorite scene in the movie was my favorite scene in the book, where Marianne goes to the top of the hillside and looks down at Willoughby's house and recites the book. It's not in the book. It's on the book. And these were members of the Jane Austen Society. So it all began to merge. And I thought that was such a great compliment to her as a storytelling, that she could do it in such a way that you felt the authenticity of it, even when it wasn't authentic at all.
I think Emma Thompson walks on water. And one of the things that you didn't mention is what she cuts out.
Yeah. I said, Anne. Anne is one of the great. Anne Steele is one of the greatest Jane
Austen. The Willoughby
Austen.
confession scene. So there's an entire scene in the novel where Willoughby comes while Marianne is, of course, on her 3rd day in her deathbed, so that she's the Christ figure who is in her 3rd day of her illness. And he shows up, and he begins in his forked-tongued, rakish way to describe to Eleanor his true motivations. And it's a really long scene.
Yeah.
It's the only scene where Jane Austen swears, because Willoughby is drunk, and he's completely over the top. It's an amazing scene.
Yeah, it's why I wanted to adapt the book.
And it totally works to cut it. It's sort of, you just don't need it. Instead, you have that wonderful shot of the back of a horse that he's sitting on as he's watching her get married. That's it. You see regret at a glance.
So often, and I hear this from actors, I hear it from directors, I hear it from writers, the reason that you wanted to do something gets cut. Always. It's like if there's a line of dialogue that made an actor do the movie, it's never in the movie. It's weird how that works. And that scene is so incredible because she thinks it's her mother arriving. And Marianne's finally okay, and she runs down the stairs. At least maybe I'm remembering script scenes that aren't actually in the book, but that's how it was, because the scene was written. She runs down thinking it's her mother, and and in walked Willoughby, right? Isn't that the line? It's just one of the great, great moments. And then there's this whole scene, and Emma wrote the scene, and it didn't work. It was not a moment where you wanted to stop the movie. It just didn't work. And we needed the information, which we kind of gave to Brandon, and we kind of put it all over the place. But I loved that scene, and I always wanted to make it work. And then when Ang Lee became involved and he read the book for the first time, he said, well, what about this scene? This is one of the greatest scenes ever. We've got to put it back. And I was like, yeah, we're going to put it back. And we tried to put it back, and we had a scene in Amy Pascal's office at Sony where it was decided that we just couldn't have it, and I wept. I really did. I cried. I couldn't believe we were never going to get to have it, but we couldn't have it. And really what we did was replace it with that little 2-line scene of Marianne and Eleanor on the bed. It's like, well, he did love you, but not enough.
Dearest, was I right to tell you? Of course. Whatever his past actions, whatever his present course, at least you may be certain that he loved you. But not enough. Not enough.
Bernie, I think you actually really touched on that in a big way in yours. I mean, I think you really feel what you're talking about when you watch Lizzie Bennet Diaries. So.
I'm not going to say it was easy. It was just all there, though. It's like the work is there. It's very clear what to do, and it really just became choices of what to adapt and how to adapt it. The architecture, the skeletal structure of the narrative, the great characters that she designed. You do some dialing to modernize them, of course, with things like the ability to swipe left and right, which we didn't even have when Lizzie Bennet Diaries came out. Just like you make those choices, but otherwise it was relatively a simple, straightforward adaptation when we did Lizzie Bennet Diaries. And those of you who've watched the show and you break it down, I think we're very accurate. Especially considering that we're 200 years later, we're very accurate. We cover pretty much every single nuance of all the characters, at least the primary ones, and get them all in there and hit plot points that the movies and the miniseries kind of just miss because they don't have the time. That's fine. And we find ways to modernize each of the thematics of each of these hard choices. How Charlotte decides to marry Collins, what is that today? Even things like that are able to be drawn from, as you said, 2 centuries later.
You're nervous, of course. My intentions have been too obvious. In fact, when I saw you again, I knew that you would be the one to share the most important
part of my life.
Great minds do indeed think alike.
Indeed.
Charlotte Liu, would you become my partner at my company? My offer is firm and serious.
Lead with your best foot forward.
Please take some time to consider this offer. I eagerly await your positive response.
Yeah. I'll let you know.
In our show, all 13 characters that appeared on screen all were, in a sense, public eye because they all knew they were being recorded. They all had social media accounts as characters, so you as the audience could comment and ask them things like, and that they would respond all the time. It's like, what do you, aren't you upset that Lizzie said this about you in the last video? You can do that. So you have a character, Lizzie, being kind of, in a way, very invasive about this. And it's like, she imitates Darcy. She imitates Caroline. She portrays caricatures of them on a public forum to tens to hundreds of thousands of viewers.
Oh, doesn't Lizzie just improvise these? You want to improvise? I simply don't understand the purpose of playing video games. How can any self-respecting adult waste their time in such childish activities?
Well, Caroline, I will admit, it isn't particularly my cup of tea.
Was that good? Did I do it right? Don't break character. Be Darcy.
Oh, I don't really know Darcy.
And this pitiful little town is just so horribly depressing. I can't imagine you and my brother are enjoying your stay here.
Well, it's not actually that terrible, but I suppose I can see what you mean.
And the people in this town enjoying top 40 radio, laughter, and non-organic produce, so uncivilized.
I disagree with you there.
There are people who may think, oh, it's funny. But there are people who go like, why are you doing that? That's so mean. You shouldn't be doing that. So you had that in the subtext of the show, because they're talking about these rich guys who are single and who have this public persona, and yet we as the viewer accept it. At least I hope most of us did who watched the show, because we accept it because that's part of the narrative. Gossip has always been something we all. It's not about just specifically Jane's work, or just in general. We always want to hear stuff about what he or she said if they're in the public eye. And Jane's characters, especially now, they're like legacy characters. They're legends. You say the word Darcy, you know what I'm talking about. You say the word Collins, you know what I'm talking about. You say Wickham, you know what I'm talking about. So all of those things now have 200 years of legacy and versions of them, and they're iconic in so many ways. And then you're hearing them being talked about in a sense of where they're just human. And I feel that subtextually for us and subconsciously for us, like we kind of like seeing them brought down a notch in a way, seeing them humanized, seeing their flaws, seeing them portrayed out in a sense for the YouTube generation, however you want to say it.
It's very easy to provide a contemporary take on a Jane Austen story, because as we talked about her getting the species, there is a timelessness to all the stories. You're allowed to put yourself into the place of somebody who, as Jenny was saying, don't sign me up for that world. You're allowed to go visit that world. And we do it for different reasons, as we've already said. In the Jane Austen Book Club, these people are living this kind of harried lives where they've carved out a little space to have a book club. And so in the midst of their crazy lives, in which someone's husband is cheating on them, and should I leave him or not, and everybody has some kind of crisis in their life, they find themselves in these kind of prosaic, impossible situations. But when they read the books, they find themselves in these kind of classic impossible situations where they've been disinherited, or the person that they were in love with goes off with someone else. So these kind of dramatic strands translate really easily to any time where anyone is reading, because the stuff still goes on, because we're all still people.
To me, the part that seems forced is Marianne ending up with Colonel Brandon. Anyone else feel that?
Oh, I have no problem with that. He rides up on a big stallion, sweeps her into his arms. I'm there.
From the time Colonel Brandon meets Marianne, he lavishes all his attention on her, and meanwhile, she's throwing herself at Willoughby.
Willoughby is a player.
Women never go for the nice guy.
Please, men say that, but you get to know some of these men who complain the most, you find out they're not as nice as they like to think they are.
Okay, you know what struck me is that Colonel Brandon is only a few years younger than Mrs. Dashwood. Well, why does he take up with the daughter, not the mother?
Yeah, why not Mrs. Dashwood?
Maybe Mrs. Dashwood won't give him the time of day.
The book is about the young people.
Yeah, because Jane Austen thinks that nothing interesting can happen to a woman over 25.
In the Jane Austen Book Club, one of the things, speaking of the morality thing, tying these two questions together, was that people are always judging each other. And you notice that in the books, that people are always having an opinion about somebody else and whether they should or shouldn't be a certain way. And so she joins in that, Austen. She's often judging her characters. But at the same time, she's writing stories in which people were wrong about Darcy. People are, they've judged, but they are wrong. And you see that virtually in every book, that someone is wrong about someone else. So she's both saying, don't rush to judgment, and also point out who the bad guys are so we don't get involved with them. And that, we love that as audience members. We love having opinions about all the characters. And that's one of the reasons why people stay for Q&As after movies, is they want to hear a little bit more discussion about these characters. And she just gives us so much of it in her books. It's just a pleasure to read.
You've been watching a conversation on Jane Austen on Story. On Story is part of a growing number of programs in Austin Film Festival's On Story project, including the On Story PBS series, now streaming online, the On Story radio program and podcast in collaboration with Public Radio International, and the On Story book series available on Amazon. To find out more about On Story and Austin Film Festival, visit onstory.tv or austinfilmfestival.com.